All right, good morning. It's Monday, April 6th, and we're going to start with some conversation about the AP test. On Friday, we learned that the test is going to be one question, it's going to be a prose analysis essay. We learned that it will be on May 13th at 1 o'clock, and we learned that you'll have 45 minutes to write that essay, and then a 5-minute window of time to upload that essay. So that's good news for a lot of us because it means we don't have to deal with poetry. The multiple choice, if you've been scrambling about terms, you don't have to worry about it. So it's just, can you analyze a passage and, in the time provided. So we'll get more information about how the uploading process will work, where we'll get the question. I would expect to log into your College Board account to see the question and then see the platform for uploading it. But once we get an email with directions, we'll know more. So that's good news. I hope everybody's doing well at home and everybody's healthy and you're dealing with being stir crazy as well as you can. So for the warm-up, we're going to look at this paragraph from A Tale of Two Cities. We're going to look at a lot of older language passages between now and the test because that's something that a lot of us struggle with, how to deal with the structure of language from earlier than the 20th century, how to break it down. But for now, just take a look at this paragraph and I'm going to go ahead and pause. Look at the two questions below. Which two major literary devices are used in this opening paragraph? And for what purpose does Dickens employ these two literary devices? In other words, why are they there? What do you think he's trying to get across? So go ahead and put this recording on pause if you like. I'm going to pause for about 2 minutes to let you read through it, figure out what two devices you think there are, and why you think there might be there. In fact, I'll pause, take about 5 minutes, because that, why it's there could take a little longer. And then come back and we'll talk about it. Okay, so hopefully you found anaphora, which is the repetition of the beginning of sentences. It was the best of times. It was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom. It was the age of foolishness. It was the epoch of belief. If you don't know what an epoch is, that's just a time period, like era. It was the epoch of incredulity, and so on. All the way through. You see all these sentences starting with it was. So anaphora would be number one, repetition at the beginning of a sentence or phrase. And the other one is what we call paradox, where you have conflicting ideas presented right next to each other, existing at the same time. Because all at once, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times, it was the age of wisdom, it was the age of foolishness, it was the epoch of belief, it was the epoch of incredulity. And remember, that doesn't mean things are incredible, it means that people are not believing. It was the season of light, it was the season of darkness, it was the spring of hope, it was the winter of despair. We had everything before us, we had nothing before us. We were all going direct to heaven, we were all going direct the other way. So, a series of oppositions. So, anaphora and paradox. So then we move to the next question. For what purpose does Dickens employ these two literary devices? Why are they here? Well, we use anaphora to emphasize things, to grab the reader's attention. Kind of like repetition in any form. We do this because we want the reader to pay attention to what's coming next. So what's he calling attention to? Well, what's the paradox? Well, you have one period in time in which some people think things have never been better. Some people think things have never been worse. Some people think that we have more wise people than there have ever been. Some people think people are dumber than they've ever been before. And this is kind of if you pay attention, to the news right now, this is kind of a relevant passage because we have some people who think, at least before the pandemic came down, that things had never been better in the United States. And you had some people thinking that things were terrible and needed a change. Even now, you have some people thinking that, if you look on social media, some people are thinking, oh, we're going to be out of school. We're going to be home for a year. It's going to take a long time. We have other people thinking, this could be over by, the middle of April, end of April. And that, of course, that date keeps sliding back a little bit. But you have ideas at war with one another, and you have people holding one idea versus people holding the other idea. And if you pay attention to social media, some of the conversations get a little vivid, get a little salty. So here, Dickens is using this. This is the very first paragraph, as you see, of his novel, A Tale of Two Cities. And his novel is set leading up to the French Revolution. And that was also a time, if you paid attention to world history or in your European history class, when you had a lot of tension as far as ideas, the French aristocracy versus the French working class. And you know how that turned out if you paid attention in your history class. But the purpose of the opening of this book is to set the stage for the reader to anticipate a conflict in ideas. All right, let's move on to a passage from Brave New World. Actually, two passages today. We are going to be looking at a passage from chapter 1 that we looked at in the past. We're going to look at it again, though. And a passage from chapter 14. So what are we doing with this today? Well, we know that the AP test is now just going to be about prose analysis. And prose analysis, you'll often have questions about mood or tone, character development, conflicts between characters, and character attitude. So today we're going to focus on mood in our analysis. So, chapter 1, we have the description of the Central London Hatchery and Conditioning Center. And then in chapter 14, we have the description of the Park Lane Hospital for the Dying. And then, obviously, before we start reading, what's a question that we can use to inform what we're looking at? What is Huxley, that's the author, trying to say about his society and perhaps warn us about the future with these two passages? Okay, so what point is being made? I'm going to give you, I'm going to put this on pause in a second. You should take 5 or 6 minutes, read through this passage and take a look at these questions. What is the purpose of this space in chapter 1? In other words, what is this building for? What are the most vivid words that stand out to you? What are the colors in this room? Color is very important with respect to mood. What is the overall mood here? Pick a word that you think sets the mood in this passage. What paradox do we get in this space? In other words, what paradox do you find in this room? And then what is one oxymoron or example of irony from the passage you could use as evidence to support this? Okay, so I'm going to put the recording on pause. I'd like you to take 5 or 6 minutes, read through the passage, and think about the answers to these questions, because those will help you. Also, any other devices that you see would also be useful. So I'm going to put this on pause, and I'll see you in a minute. Okay, we're back. So we see that let's see what you found. What is the purpose of this space in chapter 1? Well, it's the Central London Hatchery and Conditioning Center. We talked about, when we were reading chapter 1, that this is where children are born and initially raised. And if we look at the word choice that's used there, hatchery, we normally think of hatching like perhaps a bird with eggs instead of people. So it seems already that something's very different in this society. What are the most vivid words that stand out to you Well, your answer might change. I noticed harsh, um, hungrily, goose flesh. That's when you get goosebumps on your skin. Then I noticed this sentence: wintriness responded to wintriness. So I'll probably come back and look at that some more. We've got corpse-colored rubber, um, and then we've got streak after luscious streak. Those are the things that stood out to me. So then I think about, what do most of these words have in common? Well, there's a harsh light that's hungrily seeking something, some sort of goose flesh. Wintriness responded to wintriness. Um, but then we have this, in the middle of this, we have these items that make these luscious streaks. Okay, I'm going to move on to colors. Well, I have white. I have corpse colored. I have nickel, kind of a metal color. And then I have yellow. But the yellow items are just the yellow barrels of the microscopes. So everything else in this room is either white or metallic. So what's the overall mood here? I would say that I would use a word like ominous, but frightening, creepy. What is and I would use one of those three moods. And I'm just combining the vivid words that I found with the colors that I found to get that sense. What paradox is established in this space? What is one oxymoron or example of irony that I could use? Well, if it's the place where life begins, then why are the workers' gloves compared to corpses? That's interesting. That's something that. Why do we have an image connected to death in the place where life begins? That's interesting. This idea of wintriness. Why is this here where life begins? Usually, if you go to a hospital and you go to a neonatal ward where the babies who aren't quite ready to go home wait, everything's very brightly colored. There are lots of, and probably that's more for the parents than the infants because infants can't see very far yet. But it's, visually very stimulating. But here, it's just a lab. So the paradox is, even though this is the place where life begins, there sure is a lot of death here. There sure is a lot of death here in the imagery. Next, let's look at chapter 14. Here we have a description of the Park Lane Hospital for the Dying. And I put the same 5 questions. What's the purpose of this space? What are the most vivid words that stand out to you? What are the colors in the room? What is the overall mood here? And then what paradox is expressed in this space? What is one oxymoron or other example of irony you could use as evidence to support this? So I'm going to put this on pause. Give yourself 5 or 6 more minutes. Take a look at this and see what you come up with. Okay, so let's take a look. Purpose of this space. Obviously, it's called a hospital for the dying. So it seems like it would be where you go to await to wait the very end of your life. As we talked about in this book, if you take soma all your life, like you're supposed to, once you reach adulthood, you're going to die around the age of 60. You won't ever look older, and your body will remain unchanged, but over the course of your life, soma is toxic. So around 60, you're just going to die. Your body will break down from the aggregate impact. Linda, John's mother, is in the hospital, and she's dying quickly because she's taking a lot more soma than you're supposed to take. But the doctors are kind of like, look, she's happy. She's not bothering anybody. So let's just let her do what she wants to do. That's the purpose of this space. Vivid words. Well, I noticed gaily colored aerial hearses. Now, we're going to remember that in 1930, when Huxley wrote this book, gay it meant happy. So happily colored hearses. What color are the hearses in our society? They're generally black or white. So it's interesting that they color them this way. Um, Another word is that the air was continuously live with gay synthetic melodies. So happy music being played all throughout the room. Um, they describe television as a running tap. Now, what's a tap? Well, it's the tap water. So like a faucet that you would open for for water at a sink. So they describe television here as a running sink from morning to night. Um, there's a there's a perfume in the room that constantly gets changed. And it says they're trying to describe it as a first class hotel and a feely palace. So that's interesting. Those are the vivid words that stood out to me. What are the colors? Well, we don't get many specific colors in this passage. We get happy colors, so you could think about what those might be. Up here, you see that the building is made of primrose tiles. And that's an interesting word to use there because if you've ever heard the term rose colored glasses, looking at the world through rose colored glasses, that means that you're looking at the world and you're only seeing the happy. You're not seeing the negative. You're not, and so you may make some mistakes because you're not seeing the bad that might come. Or walking down the primrose path is another kind of an older school term for, yeah, you're not paying attention to the danger and something bad's going to happen to you. But so here we could say, okay, that could suggest optimism. So just be happy because the end of life is coming. What is the overall mood here? Well, it seems like very happy, um, comfortable, um, almost celebratory. What paradox is expressed in this space? And then what is one oxymoron or other example of irony that you could use? Well, you've got the air is continuously alive with melodies in a place where death is coming. Um, you've got the fact that they're trying to create a thoroughly pleasant atmosphere between a first class hotel and a feely palace. A feely palace is what they refer to as their movie theater. Um, at a place where people are going to die. Now, if we think about, what are these places in our society like? People who are, they can't live at home anymore, but they're not, they haven't passed away yet. We call them nursing homes, assisted living facilities. And a lot of times people, the management spends some time in those places trying to make them pleasant. But there's that sense, that life is ticking away faster now when you go into those places. So there's that. So the paradox you might say is that the place where people go to die is one of the most happily decorated places that they've ever been. All right. So then we get down to this question. What is Huxley trying to say about his society with these two passages? Well, if our paradox up here is going to be that the beginning of life is described in ways that suggest death, and we're going to come down here and say, well, the place where you go to die is as lively as any other place that you've been. Um, what does that suggest? I think you come down to this word here. Synthetic is something that means man-made. It's fake. It's not real. Sometimes synthetic things are an improvement. Like if you go to get your oil changed and they ask if you want synthetic oil instead of regular motor oil. It costs more, but you won't have to come get your car's oil changed as quickly. Like with regular oil, sometimes it's every 3 to 5,000 miles. But with synthetic oil, you can wait 10,000 miles. So more convenient and perhaps better for your engine. But synthetic obviously isn't always better. And in questions of life and death, well, what are they doing up here in the hatchery? They've taken life and they've made the process synthetic. And now they're also using a synthetic process to welcome people to death. So one thing that you might say is that Huxley's trying to say that his society has become too synthetic. But you might have, something else that you would say. We're going to do some more with this passage tomorrow, but that's where we're going to stop now. At 11:50, I'll open up the live Q&A. So if you have questions about what we went through here or in the warm-up, or if you have questions about the AP test, that'll be the time to do that. But I will see you then.